I had an interview with Mrs. Tannenbaum's daughter yesterday. In that interview, we discussed her mother and her mother's case. This is the 50th anniversary of that case, and Becky's mother was one of my first clients. She was referred to me by a lawyer in Chicago, for whom I had clerked briefly, named Leonard Carlin. Leonard Carlin was an activist and wrote a couple of briefs on how the government was violating the UN Charter with its conduct in Vietnam. I was active in anti-Vietnam activities and edited my law school newspaper, and we were the first in the country to come out editorially against the Vietnam War. In any event, when I moved back to Colorado, I got a call from Mr. Carlin who asked if I would help a client of his out who wished to move to Colorado. That client's name was Gelia Tannenbaum. A week later, I received a week later, I received a letter from Mrs. Tannenbaum asking for my assistance. It kind of reminded me of the commercial where a neighbor asks another person, asks his neighbor to help him find a construction contractor and then ask him to do all kinds of ancillary things such as run credit checks, escrow, and things like that. That's sort of what Mrs. Tannenbaum did. Once she got an agreement for something, then she always wanted something more and more and more and more. In any event, since she was my first client, I got to spend a lot of time with her. I was living in Denver, and she lived there too. And I found her house at 248 Logan Street. Well, after interacting with her for quite a while, I formed a few corporations for her. One was Universal Graphics and a few other Universal things. And I had a job working with a tax accountant in Boulder named Clayton Bell. Clayton Bell was trying to do a subdivision north of Boulder called Lake Valley. And the loan that he got was reneged on, and he was left with a large amount of development costs and in a position where he might lose the whole project. Mrs. Tannenbaum somehow found out about it and offered to help out. She also helped another friend of hers out named Paul Morris. Well, at that point, I didn't have much else to do except for some tax work, which I was growing to hate rather quickly, but which was also my source of income, so I had much choice. Anyway, to say that Mrs. Tannenbaum was bizarre is a gross understatement. What I subsequently found out about her is that she was born in Chicago, lived downstate near St. Louis, got arrested there, and participated in some sort of sting operation involving the government and corrupt politicians. She then appeared in several FBI files that we got with the Freedom of Information Act that I'll go into later, and was married 4 times. During this marriage, she had 4 children. These marriages were rather bizarre also. One of the husbands was a cryptographer for the Air Force. he was a cryptographer in Texas and then later at Boulder Air Force Base in Washington, D.C. Her brother was a scientist at Los Alamos National Laboratories in New Mexico and was fairly famous. Earlier research indicated that he might have had something to do with maser or laser technology, and in the same area as the movie or novel Falcon and Snowbird was concerned with. So I suffered through Mrs. Tannenbaum, and finally we got a place in Boulder, and I moved there in 1968 and have been there ever since. I would see Mrs. Tannenbaum occasionally, but she also helped other lawyers in the city. One day, Thomas Rhea showed up in my office for an appointment. We talked for over an hour about various things, and I gave him advice on a few things. He paid a retainer and left. It wasn't until much later that I realized what a high-powered client he was. His grandfather was the only elected head of state for the nation of Czechoslovakia. Her father was a lawyer, or his father was a lawyer there. Rhea's family owned the Skoda Iron Works, and they were bankers. Rhea escaped Czechoslovakia in World War II, and with his mother, and she moved to Berkeley by way of Austria. While in Austria, she met the U.S. official that was the administrator of the Marshall Plan there, and they married. Rhea then grew up in Berkeley, and about the time he was graduating from University of California there, his stepfather took a swan dive off the Oakland Bay Bridge. Interestingly enough, he was Brzezinski's first cousin. Brzezinski was National Security Advisor under, I think, Jimmy Carter. So from Berkeley, Rhea then went to graduate school at Harvard and was a graduate assistant for Henry Kissinger, who was Nixon's National Security Advisor. While at Harvard studying under Kissinger, he took a trip behind the Iron Curtain as one of the few scholars that was allowed to travel there during the Cold War and did some research. Later, I had occasion to look at some of the CIA files regarding Rhea. And with all the traveling and things like this, the CIA files stated pretty much categorically that they had never heard of Professor Rhea, period.